Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Around this time yesterday, we were listening to a live conversation between former President Donald Trump and Bloomberg editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite in Chicago, in which he was talking about Chicago, Detroit, and other industrialized American cities, and in some senses, saying they make us look like a developing nation.
Literally what he said.
That is the picture he sees when he looks at the cities of America.
That's true, and we wanted to have a conversation with someone who knows what it's like to run a city. I'm a big fan of mayors. I think you understand, Kailey. These are politicians who don't always have the luxury to play the partisan game and go along with the crowd. They need to get things done. They need to build relationships, actually know their constituents on a first-name basis so they can manage the city. This is about potholes. This is about getting people to work. This is about public transportation, keeping people safe. A lot of the things that lawmakers in Washington will never have to face. And it's where we start our conversation with the mayor of St. Louis. Mayor Tishaura Jones is joining us, interestingly, from Mexico City. This is a conversation we have been looking forward to as part of Bloomberg CityLab. And Mayor, it's great to have you with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I know you're a long way from home. What are you learning, and what are you talking about today at CityLab?
Well, thank you for having me. Bloomberg CityLab, this is my second year coming, and it has been just a whole wealth of idea sharing from mayors and leaders all across the globe. And what I have found out is that whether you are a mayor in St. Louis, Missouri, or in Glasgow in the UK, or even in Africa, we all share the same struggles and the same issues, and we just have different approaches to them. So we're able to share how we've tackled a lot of the same ideas, and also it's relationship building. So I'm really enjoying myself over these past couple of days.
Well, as this is your second time attending, this year may be different than last, Mayor, because this year it is happening with just weeks to go until a presidential election in which voters in your city and cities across America will be heading to the polling booth to cast a vote. How concerned are you about the kind of rhetoric we're getting around this election, as we've had people warning us about civil unrest, not just here in Washington at the Capitol building, but in cities, in state capitals? What is St. Louis ready for?
So we're very concerned. I'm concerned for my country because this is the most monumental election that I have witnessed since I have been voting as a young teenager. We're not concerned in St. Louis per se on any violence happening at our polling places. Missouri is pretty much a red state. We know which way it's going to go for the presidential election and unfortunately our statewide elections. But what I am most concerned about is in our swing states and states where the vote is really tight or where the polls are really tight. And I'm concerned about making sure that there is a peaceful transfer of power no matter who wins.
Mayor Jones, Kailey mentioned earlier some of Donald Trump's remarks about cities in his interview with Bloomberg yesterday. He disparaged Milwaukee ahead of the Republican National Convention there. He's frequently criticized Chicago and San Francisco and took aim at Detroit yesterday, which was curious, knowing that it is, of course, in the swing state of Michigan, which pretty much any candidate needs to win to get into the White House here. I'd love for you to listen to what he said about Detroit, and we'll have you respond. Here he is.
Not one president, think of it, not one president charged China anything. They said, oh, they are a third world nation, they are developing. Well, we're a developing nation too. Take a look at Detroit. Take a look at our cities. We're a developing nation. We have to develop more than they do. We're way behind them. You take a look at what's happened to our cities.
Mayor, he has said recently that if Kamala Harris is elected, that the entire state of Michigan will look like Detroit. What would a Trump 2.0 mean for mayors and people who live in American cities?
Well, Trump 2.0 is going to mean that all American cities will look like third world countries. Right now, we enjoy a great relationship with the Biden-Harris administration because they are focused on cities. They have hired many former mayors in their administration and cabinet secretaries, and those mayors know what it's like to lead on the ground. They know that mayors are closest to the problems and closest to the solutions. Mayors get things done. We are the implementers of federal policy, of state policy. And right now, we know with the Biden-Harris administration and the investments that they've made directly into cities, we have been able to turn our cities around and see investment in cities that, and in places that haven't seen investment in decades, and taking care of the least of these, of the marginalized, of people who really need help. And we know we're not going to get that kind of assistance from a Trump 2.0 administration.
Well, we also heard Donald Trump yesterday, not in that Bloomberg interview, Mayor, but in a town hall that was taped with Fox with an entirely female audience, saying that some abortion restrictions are too tough and that they'll be redone in some of these states. And I would point out that in your state of Missouri, abortion is on the ballot in November. I know you just told us, Mayor, that it's not going to be a surprise what way Missouri goes in the presidential race. It is going very likely to go red. But what's going to happen to Amendment 3, the Right to Reproductive Freedom Initiative?
So Missouri is a little unique in that Amendment 3 is actually polling ahead. So we totally expect Amendment 3 to pass. But unfortunately, Missourians will elect Republicans to lead our state who will do everything in their power to try to turn those gains back. Missouri enjoys a very liberal policy when it comes to access to the ballot and passing very progressive measures on ballot initiatives. But unfortunately, we continue to elect Republicans statewide who do everything in their power to roll back everything that we pass at the ballot. So I expect nothing less than that to happen if Amendment 3 passes and we get a Republican-controlled state assembly and statewide offices.
Well, Mayor, we'd love to have you back on Bloomberg to talk about that if and when that does happen. Thank you so much for joining us today live from Mexico City at Bloomberg CityLab. That was the Mayor of St. Louis, Tishaura Jones, here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Now, we asked the mayor there, Joe, about if she's concerned about the elections, not just the security of the vote, but the security of the people trying to vote, trying to count the votes, as there has been a lot of calls or concern around potential civil unrest that could ensue. That is a question mark. What seems to be a certainty at this point is that there is going to be a lot of litigation around this election, and we know that because there already is.
Well, that's true. People talk about the idea of this election being decided in court, but the fact of the matter is courts are already helping to shape this election. Did you see the big take today? This is the smartest thing that you'll read on the terminal. A really fascinating story with great data that we've put together. 165, by the way, at least 165 lawsuits filed since 2023, Kailey, against 37 states, challenging every facet, as we're reporting, of the presidential contest.
Yeah, and we want to get more into this reporting now and turn to Bloomberg's Zoe Tillman, who's here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. And of course, you can find her big take on the terminal and online. So Zoe, 165 lawsuits already, and we're still 3 weeks out from Election Day. So what's this number realistically going to look like on November 6th?
You know, it's hard to know. It's going to depend on where the results are close, right? So preemptively, the campaigns are getting lawyers into place in every state, really, but focused on the 7 states where the polls are closest. But it's going to depend on where it looks like a candidate is prepared to lose, and do they see an opening to ask a judge to intervene in the days before or after the results are certified.
It just reminds us how this is shifting under our feet as we speak, as we make our way through the final 3 weeks here. And there was an important development in Georgia yesterday. A judge temporarily blocking the state rule requiring hand counting of ballots. That's a big deal in the way this is going to roll out following the election. How many more rulings could we see between now and November 5th?
We know in Georgia we're expecting more in that state alone on this question of how ballots are counted and the role of officials at the county level to certify those results. So we're waiting on decisions in other cases before different judges challenging that hand count rule, a rule that the state's Republican Secretary of State and Attorney General said was likely illegal. So it's not just Democrats coming in to oppose that. We're also waiting for decisions on a rule that would empower local officials to do their own independent investigations into the election as part of the certification process, a rule that, again, is being criticized as a way to inject chaos and confusion into a process that historically has not been controversial.
Well, could it be just as chaotic for these rulings to happen so close to an election than as it would be chaotic for these things to actually go into place? I mean, how are local election officials going to understand what exactly the processes are if they're very much in question right up until it's go time?
You know, I've talked to officials at the county level who are, in charge of these systems, and they've told me, for the first time this year, I've signed up for accounts to monitor dockets because I need to know what is still outstanding that I need to plan for. So they've got an eye on these cases. They know that things might change ahead of time. They're trying to prepare as best they can. But it's something judges are sensitive to, and they understand that they too can inject confusion and chaos by making changes, even if the finding is that something is illegal or unconstitutional. They have to balance that finding with the possibility of creating even more problems ahead of Election Day.
It's interesting coming off of 2020. Thinking of Republicans as potentially being more litigious when it comes to electoral outcomes. You found that they have been more active than Democrats when it comes to filing lawsuits, but it's only 55%. Democrats pretty busy too.
They've been busy. I think that the left has been in court challenging states that they feel are trying to put up illegal barriers to voting, and that's historically been something we've seen Democrats litigating over ahead of elections. I think what's different this year, besides just the volume, is we've seen, for instance, the Republican National Committee saying in advance, we are going to go to court. This is a part of now the campaign season and the strategy in a way that it just hasn't formally been a part of this landscape really, before 2020.
You must be really living this. This is a massive story that took a lot of legwork.
Oh, thank you. It's a very intense spreadsheet.
For sure. And that's why you should really check this out. Look for it on the terminal. The Big Take. More than 165 lawsuits already shaping the U.S. presidential election. Zoe Tillman, thanks for great reporting and a great conversation. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz on the fastest show in politics as we make our way coming up later this hour to the economy and the conversation you saw and heard with Donald Trump yesterday. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, the Republican economist, will join us to pick through what we learned from Donald Trump here on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
The Washington edition and the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And if you were with us on the Tuesday edition at this time yesterday, we were seeing a more than hour-long conversation between former President Donald Trump and Bloomberg editor-in-chief John Micklethwait wrapping up. It was extensive. They covered a lot of territory. But they began with a question around the deficit. To summarize, the question was essentially, you've proposed a lot of tax cuts. What do you say to people who are concerned about the impact that will have on the U.S. debt? This was his very first answer.
We're all about growth. We're going to bring companies back to our country. We're going to lower taxes still further for companies that are going to make their product in the USA. We're going to protect those companies with strong tariffs because I'm a believer in tariffs.
From our interview here at this time yesterday on Bloomberg, and it's where we start our conversation with Douglas Holtz-Eakin, president, the American Action Forum, of course, economist, former OMB director, or CBO director. Douglas, forgive me. It's great to have you back with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Thanks, Jeff.
This has been an interesting conversation about tariffs and taxes. And we'll start on the Donald Trump side here. Are you getting religion as a Republican on tariffs, Douglas?
I've had religion for a long time about tariffs, thank you. But I don't think it's the same religion that Donald Trump is practicing.
Okay.
There are really two strong beliefs that he continues to display that have been really fully repudiated by the research literature. The first is that tariffs are a tax. They are a tax on purchases from foreign sellers, and there's always a question in taxes as to who bears the economic burden of the tax. Is there a way to shift it back to the seller and not bear the incidence in the United States? The answer from the literature is no. Consumers will bear these taxes, and as a result, will be made worse off, other things being the same, by the tariff policy. And his tariff policies are big, a $3 trillion proposal for a 10% across-the-board tariff. So that's sort of the first thing he clings to. And the second is, what is being accomplished by the tariff? And his assertion would be, we're going to stop trading for particular goods, especially manufactured goods, and make them in the United States instead, and we will be better as a result. But that goes against the vast amount of evidence that there are gains from international trade, and there are gains from trade in general, and tariffs are undoing those gains from trade. So they're not going to make average Americans better off in two ways. They'll bear the burden of the tariff, and they will also have more expensive products from which to choose.
Well, okay, Donald Trump definitely pushed back against that idea in this conversation yesterday, as we've seen him do repeatedly when confronted with that kind of reasoning from economists. He contended, to your point about it being more about making stuff in the U.S., that the whole idea with his tariffs is you make, and I'm quoting directly here, them so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. They, meaning companies that currently are making goods in the U.S., will come to the U.S. Even if that is how that would actually translate, how long would that take for the reordering of supply chains and the building of manufacturing facilities realistically?
That's a decades-long process, to say the least. And remember, locations are not driven just by taxes, tariffs. Locations are driven by access to markets. And a lot of facilities are not in the United States because there are greater markets outside and greater opportunities for U.S. companies to provide profits back to the United States and a standard of living in the United States by selling abroad. So to focus narrowly on that, I think misses the point. The second thing that gets missed by that is, you're diminishing the pressure on domestic producers. If you got a big tariff wall, they don't have to keep their prices low to sell things. They can raise their prices to just under the tariff wall. And if you ask anyone, are you going to do that? They'll say, oh, no, we would never do that. But if you look at what happens in response to tariffs, prices rise for the protected products. That's not good for any of us.
Well, it makes you wonder what life is going to be like at the CBO. I know he doesn't necessarily need Congress for tariffs, but President Trump would need Congress to pass the tax proposals that he's put forth, making permanent the 2017 tax cuts. And he's added a raft of them since. You know this, Douglas, whether you're talking about deductions for auto loan payments, tips, overtime, some of the other stuff. Also the SALT
Social
cap.
Security. Yeah.
CBO ought to start working on this with the green visors now.
Yes, these are proposals that don't fit any coherent philosophy. So one of the things that I just noticed that there isn't in this race a candidate who has a consistent pro-growth philosophy that relies on the private sector and believes a small contained government should get out of its way to the extent possible. That's missing. Instead, we have statist candidates who believe that they run the economy and they're going to provide the goodies to whoever they favor. So that's what you're getting. And sort of handouts at campaign stops is not new in presidential politics. But what's really, I think, most important about the Trump proposals is they're often quite large. These aren't small rifle shots. And something has to happen next year. Unlike the usual campaign thing, which is, we just couldn't get it done. We didn't get support on Capitol Hill. A tax bill has to happen next year. And people who have been promised something on the campaign, no tax on tips, overtime, whatever it might be, are going to be asking the White House, why isn't it happening? And it's going to make the process of getting to yes in 2025 harder even than it needed to be. And it's hard to begin with.
Well, and then there's the other side of that equation, which is spending. Donald Trump is talking about supplementing the lost revenue with the income from tariffs, of growing our way partially out of the tax cuts. But spending cuts are going to have to come somewhere, right? Even if there was a red sweep on in the balance of Congress in this election, along with the Donald Trump presidency, is it going to be that easy to get only lower taxes and no spending cuts through a House of Representatives where we have seen a spending battle time and time again be very difficult to keep the Republican conference in line?
Yeah. I mean, let's put the politics aside for just 1 second. I know that's what the show's about, but let's just do the arithmetic.
We do policy here too, sir.
Social Security and Medicare, $36 trillion over the next 10 years, more than half of all non-interest spending. Those two programs are going to be growing at average rates of 5.5% for Social Security, 7% for Medicare. If the economy is growing at 2% real, 2% inflation, that's 4% nominal, that's how fast revenue will grow. It'll grow at 4%. So it's not going to be able to catch up with the spending. The only way to get the deficit under control is to actually get spending to come down to the pace of growth of the nominal economy. And I will just stipulate, they can have great growth policies. They're not going to move 4 to 7. That's not going to happen. So you got to get serious about spending. And what are the two programs the president said he won't touch? Social Security and Medicare. Vice President Harris is not going to touch those. Candidate Trump's not going to touch those. All of Washington is putting its head in the sand and ignoring the real problem. That's the real problem that needs to be dealt with.
I want to turn to the Fed here, Douglas. Donald Trump was asked about Fed independence yesterday. It's one of our favorite topics around here, and I don't know how you see this. Scott Bessent joined us the other day. He said it's no different than Elizabeth Warren shouting into the wind here when it comes to the Fed. Donald Trump can say whatever he wants. We're still going to have a Fed chair, although they are talking about an alternate Fed chair of some sort here. He was asked about this in the interview on Bloomberg. Here's how he characterized the job, Douglas.
I think it's the greatest job in government. You show up to the office once a month and you say, let's see, flip a coin. And everybody talks about you like you're a god. Oh, what will he do? I think that if you're a very good president with good sense, you should be able to at least talk to him. I don't say make the decision at all.
What do you think about this, Douglas? Are we making too big a deal of the idea of the president talking to the Fed chair? And is it the best job in government?
Well, I'll pass on whether it's the best job in government. I thought I had the best job in government at the CBO, so you can ask Jerome Powell what he thinks. Look, the president has enormous influence at the Fed. The president appoints all the governors, or they get Senate confirmation, chooses the chair. So it's not like the president has no say in Fed policy. He has an enormous say. There's nothing that stops the chairman of the Federal Reserve from having lunch with the Secretary of Treasury. That's gone on for decades and decades. And the Secretary explaining the administration's position to the Fed chair. And a good Fed chair will listen and then go back and do their job. So I don't think there's anything special about Trump elevating that to a public discussion about, I'd like this in it. The only question is whether you make structural changes that allow the President of the United States to put their thumb on the scale and change decisions of the FOMC. And I think that would be a mistake. All of the research evidence suggests that the independence of the Fed and monetary authorities in general produces better monetary policy. I think we should stick to that.
Well, as we consider the Fed's monetary policy, we have now entered a world in which policy is easing rather than tightening. We saw that first 50 basis point Fed cut. We could see one or two more this year, Douglas. My question is, what happens in 2025 when we have a new president? What is your expectation around what the fiscal policy pursued by that president and whatever Congress we get could mean ultimately for the path the Fed is likely to go down? Are they going to have to start hiking again in short order?
Well, I mean, I think we know maybe this isn't the best job in government because when asked that question, Chairman Powell had to dodge and weave like mad. So that's a hard job. Look, here's a scenario that is not crazy. We just talked about it, and it's very hard for the Fed. President Trump gets elected. He institutes across-the-board 10% tariff using executive authorities that he believes he has. What does the Fed do? Do they allow that to pass through and get a 10% increase in the price level, perhaps undermining their credibility in their fight against inflation? Or do they do a U-turn, lean against that by raising rates, and run the risk of a sharper downturn? This is a dilemma for the Fed. I know they don't want to talk about it in public, but in private, they have to be wargaming different scenarios to think about how they'll respond to any sort of administrative actions that could happen quickly and legislative actions that they'd be tracking during the course of 2025.
New York Times reporting Michelle Bowman could be on track to be a Fed chair in a Trump 2.0. Douglas, does that ring true?
I have no idea. I'm not privy to the personnel decisions of the Trump campaign. We'll stay tuned and watch what happens.
Let me ask you this about the narrative in Washington right now that Donald Trump, and a lot of this is based on the number crunching from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, that Donald Trump would be more of a threat to the nation's debt and deficit than Kamala Harris. In a big picture scenario, is that true?
I think in the big picture, neither is a particularly attractive candidate. Neither is dedicated to dealing with the trajectory of ever-rising debt and the unsustainable nature of the federal budget. Neither has sensible economic policies that will generate more rapid trend growth. And neither has a track record of follow-through. So these proposals on the campaign, his add up to a bigger number. But I'm interested in the track record of the individual in at key moments being willing to make tough decisions in favor of the future and having the ability to control the spending. Neither has any evidence on that front.
In our final minute here, Douglas, the Trump campaign and others we have spoken with have suggested things would be so different if COVID hadn't interrupted what was happening in the economy during his administration. When we reference back to the idea we didn't grow our way out of the 2017 tax cuts, to what extent is that true?
Well, I think that they should get a lot of credit for the initial jump start to the economy. I think what's been reported on too little is the regulatory controls. The regulatory controls in the Trump administration were extraordinary. We went from adding $100 billion a year in regulatory costs to essentially nothing. And it helped small businesses. It was a big part of the jump start. The tax bill was an enormously big step forward. There was a big spending push as well. And the economy was growing like mad. But then they picked a trade war with China, and we saw it slow right down. So if we hadn't seen COVID, it's an open question whether we would have kept slowing down or not.
All right, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, always great to have you here on Balance of Power. He is president at the American Action Forum. We appreciate your time here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Mathieu here in Washington, where we already told you earlier this week about some new policy proposals from Vice President Kamala Harris as she tries to woo more black men into her electoral coalition, talking about small business loans forgivable up to $20,000, legalizing marijuana on the federal level, and yes, even providing a regulatory framework for cryptocurrencies. But it's even a little bit more explicit than that, as she is doing a media outreach as well, including an appearance on Charlemagne the God in an audio town hall yesterday, where she had this to say.
My agenda is about tapping into the ambitions and the aspirations, knowing that folks want to have an opportunity. If they want, they should have a meaningful opportunity to build wealth, including intergenerational wealth. Black families are 40% less likely to be homeowners than others. And that home ownership is one of the surest ways to build intergenerational wealth.
That's from yesterday, late yesterday, the conversation with Charlemagne, the Breakfast Club that's still resonating today, even as Kamala Harris moves on to the next interview, as we were discussing. But we want to stop down at this moment and spend some time with Charles Phillips, co-founder, managing partner of Recognized, co-chair of the Black Economic Alliance, with us speaking as a surrogate for the Harris campaign, and with us from world headquarters in New York. Charles, it's great to have you on Bloomberg TV and radio. Are we entering a new age of politics here? Kailey used the word explicit, which I like in this case. The very on-the-nose approach to specific demographics, in this case, young black men, saying it out loud. Is that what these campaigns need to be doing?
I think it's a great idea. She's basically doing what all candidates should be doing, is listening to voters. And if they are asking you questions and want detail how this affects me, give them that. So I think it's like any business responding to their customers. So we've been polling black men for the last year or so. And their top three issues all have to do with the economy, inflation, home ownership, the things she's talking about. But they want details. How is this going to work and when is this going to happen? The second thing they told us is we don't want to hear from celebrities. That's, 5% said that they'd listen to a celebrity on this topic. 32% said we'd rather hear from some black business leaders. So that's what we're doing. We're doing a town hall with her. with the black men, rather, during the Texan campaign. We have a letter with 50 black leaders coming out later this week endorsing Kamala Harris as well.
Well, when we consider, as you mentioned, the polling you were doing, what black voters want to hear, I do wonder how much longer there really is with less than 3 weeks to go until Election Day to close the gap that has been created, not between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in this regard, but where Kamala Harris is now compared to where Joe Biden was with this group in 2020. In 2020, Biden got, 87% of the black male vote? The numbers look much lower in this cycle. Is there still room for them to change materially?
Well, she's come up dramatically since she first launched. Remember, it's only been 70 days, so she had a lot of work to do to get the policy in place and to reach out to people. And one way you do that is to be explicit, because you have to get your message out quickly. She didn't have 2 years to get ready for this. So her momentum is going in the right direction, but given so little time, she's doing the right thing. Also talking to people who you normally wouldn't be expected to talk to. I think it's great. She's going on Fox News tonight. She's going to do some other shows as well. And so I think given the limited time frame, that's what you have to do.
You used that word again, Charles, explicit. You also made the point, though, that we share, as I guess varying demographics, pretty much all the same issues when it comes to the economy. People want to know how to get a house, how to pay for a car, how to pay for their kids. Why does it come down to targeting specific groups of people? This is what some refer to as identity politics, no?
Because there are specific groups who've been left out in the past. They felt like their needs weren't being addressed. Okay. They didn't participate. And if you're saying I can participate now and everyone's going to be included, how do I get in on this? And so I think it's okay. I mean, we do this for every other group all the time. There's all sorts of lobbyists for different industries, all sorts of lobbyists for gun ownership, you name it. Everybody wants to make sure that my thing is paid attention to. So I think her going group by group and saying, yeah, you're included, here's how it applies to you is a good thing.
And you mentioned that the kinds of individuals this group wants to hear from include black business leaders or just business leaders in general. And I do wonder, as we all witnessed on Bloomberg yesterday, Donald Trump getting a pretty warm reception in a room full of what included a lot of business leaders in Chicago, as we have seen as he's spoken before other economic clubs in New York or elsewhere. There is still a feeling that Donald Trump is better for business, whether it's big business or small business. How does the Harris campaign counter that messaging when she is floating things like higher corporate tax rates and the like?
I think you have to put the Trump economy in context. That's one of the things they're working on. I mean, he grew the economy about 2.5%. That's excluding his COVID year. Let's give him a break on that one. That's pretty much the same as what Obama did, 2.4% his last term, except Obama created more jobs, so about 215,000 per month. And so it's not like Trump did anything dramatically to change the course of the economy. It just continued for what he had. And then what people remember when we did the polling was the 2 COVID checks they got on the Trump with Trump's name on them. So that's a one-time thing. You have to explain that to people, like, yes, you got those checks and you were able to stop working for a while, which of course contributed to inflation as well. That's over with. And to do that, he cut taxes but created $8.4 trillion onto the deficit. So put all that in context. Yeah, that's a one-time error. It wasn't as good as people are saying it was. I'm going to do better.
We've learned today that Michelle Obama is going to be stumping for the Harris campaign. In fact, has a date set now, October 29 in Atlanta. This appears to be the real closing argument. Is the First Lady the most powerful surrogate Kamala Harris has to reach young black men?
She certainly has to be among the most powerful. She's respected by everyone. And so to the extent she's out there, that's great. President Obama's out there as well. But collectively, they have to get their message out on the actual economy. All these programs that we've been talking about, these are real. We can get them funded. Mm-hmm. You'll be able to buy a home. You can start a business. We're going to put an ESOP program, so if you're working for a big company, you can have some stock ownership. The list of things that she had in that paper that they put out had about 20 ideas in there. If you did half of those, that's going to help a lot of people, including a lot of black men.
Charles, as we have this conversation and look ahead 20 days to Election Day, it is worth pointing out the election already has begun. People are voting in a number of states, including Georgia, where early voting began with record turnout yesterday of more than 250,000 people. So how much is this about the turnout game, about encouraging some of these very same voters we're talking about to not sit on the sidelines, actually go out and put that ballot in the box or however you want to phrase it, to get them to show up?
That's where all the attention on this race can benefit Vice President Harris. If you get people to actually pay attention, get excited about the election, feel like they have a stake in it, they want to have a say and go vote, higher turnout will help her among black men, and black community in general, but all groups. And so I do think she has an advantage if people actually go out and vote.
How should Kamala Harris be spending her time in the next 20 days here? We've been using the term closing arguments a lot this week. We have no more debates. Is it actually being on the ground in the swing states, talking to the voters that we're describing here today, Charles? Is it being on the air, doing more interviews, or both?
I think she has to do both. She is doing both, and I can't imagine how tired her day must be, but she's doing all the major media outlets. She has more that are coming that I'm told. But she's on the ground going from state to state as well. But also they built a pretty big infrastructure without her in all these states with surrogates as well. So she's doing everything she can do. I just hope people are listening.
Tell her we'd love to talk to her.
Yeah, she has a standing invitation to do one of those interviews here on Bloomberg, sir. But thank you for participating in one with us. It was great to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Charles Phillips, co-founder and managing partner of Recognize and co-chair of the Black Economic Alliance. Thank you very much. Speaking today as a surrogate for the Harris campaign. Now, as we have seen this media blitz on her behalf, as Charles was just discussing, and on Donald Trump's for that matter, we want to turn back to our political panel to talk about this strategy. Jeanne Zaino, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner. So, Jeanne, he's talking there about how she has more media interviews on the books. Certainly, she is doing more today. And I do wonder if one in particular interview today, this interview on Fox, is going to be the highest stakes and highest degree of difficulty, one that she could face or has faced up to this point and will face going forward.
Yeah, it very well could be. This is a really important test for her. So far, a lot of the interviews she's done, not all of them, but a lot of them have been friendly with a friendly interviewer and a friendly platform. That is not to say that Brett Baier is going to be unfriendly, a very nice gentleman, but he's going to be tough. And so she does have high stakes here. I couldn't agree more with Charles. It is very important she is doing these. And quite frankly, she should have been doing them earlier. This is what people have been calling for. There is no reason, and Pete Buttigieg has showed us this, that Democrats need to stay away from Fox. That goes back to, these early campaigns where Democrats agreed not to debate on Fox, and it's persisted. It is a bad move because you leave a big part of the country. And so I'm happy she's made this decision.
Interesting conversation we heard earlier today on Bloomberg TV and radio that we brought you with Stanley Druckenmiller. Rick, he said, gun to his head, he thinks Donald Trump wins. In the last 12 days, the market very convinced that Donald Trump is going to win, although he's not voting himself. And we learned today that Elon Musk has dumped another $75 million into the super PAC supporting Donald Trump. Miriam Adelson gave $95 million to the Preserve America PAC, bringing her donations into the 9-figure zone. Are we going to look back at this period of time as the moment when Donald Trump regained the lead?
It's hard to tell. I mean, I read the Emerson poll come out this morning that has Harris up. I'm talking about a national poll, so forgive me. This is
we must be getting close.
But 5 points ahead of Trump on a national survey with likely voters, which is basically where most of the pundits have been saying she needs to be in order to translate that into a victory into these targeted states. So I think I think Stanley Druckenmiller was right. It's a very hard thing to figure out. He said he was watching the markets to figure it out. I'm watching survey data. We all have our, sort of crutches. But the bottom line on it is right now it's about turnout. And that's where the Elon Musk money comes in. I mean, that's $75 million to do canvassing, get out the vote. The Trump campaign is doing something that's incredibly risky, has not ever proven to be effective, which is contracting out your own get out the vote victory programs. And they're contracting with a firm that, did this for Ron DeSantis in Iowa. He got all of 20%. Not even half of what Donald Trump got in Iowa. So why they would go to this model, I don't know. I assume it means there are financial problems with the RNC and the Trump campaign, and so they needed this kind of capacity. But just to put it into scale, Kamala Harris's victory PAC has $690 million in it. So I don't even think it's, a motivational thing anymore. It's going to be just the mechanics of trying to get the people you've already identified. And if you haven't identified them by now as being your supporters, then you're flying blind. And then it's just you're turning out folks in a zip code that you hope have more Republicans than Democrats. Yeah. So I think it's actually the opposite. I would put my money on someone who built the state offices, who hired thousands of people to work on them, who've been doing it now for 6 months. And that might have been the best gift that Biden gave to the Harris campaign, was a focus on local organization.
Well, and does that local organization show up before actual election day or the tallying of the votes? Jeanne, we've spent a lot of time talking about how the resources at the Harris campaign's disposal haven't translated into the kind of bumping in polling that you might expect to see if you were running a ton of ads for months. But is it because we haven't actually seen the effect of the money fully showing up yet?
Yeah, we have not. And that is, so frustrating, I'm sure, to the Harris campaign. That said, we always knew this was going to be a close election. But can we just go back for a second to the Elon Musk money? Wasn't the idea with Donald Trump when he rose on the political scene that he came with his own money, and so he wasn't beholden to anyone? Yesterday, he's talking to John Micklethwait about appointing Elon Musk with all this fundraising to head deregulation, to head government cutting, which creates something of a conflict of interest, right? Because Elon Musk runs companies like SpaceX and Tesla. So he would, in fact, be in charge of the commission, I suspect, of the very federal agencies who are supposed to regulate him. And so the very reason that many voters turned to Donald Trump, because he wasn't going to be beholden to those folks in the swamp, as he called it, of Washington, D.C., seems to have turned in the midst of all of his legal troubles. So that is something that we don't hear a lot about, but certainly should be raised in this context.
Yeah, and I suspect we'll hear a bit more about. Interesting when it comes to the money, though, Rick. You were making a really important point yesterday in our special coverage of the Trump interview. In our remaining moment, you don't just need money for the election anymore. You need money for the legal fight that starts the day after.
Yeah, hundreds of millions of dollars were spent in the ensuing 2 months after the election in 2020, protecting the ballots that were already done, doing recounts, hiring lawyers to prosecute over 60 lawsuits on Trump's behalf. All that had to be paid for somehow. All the strategists, you keep the campaign fully staffed just in case you need to turn out a protest or, show up at a precinct somewhere to watch a recount. I mean, it's really significant. And so money matters.
Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, our signature panel. We thank you, as always, on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
They should be checking shares of McDonald's, I feel like, and they're not really moving much today despite the news. Gosh, barely lower. We're down 11 cents at the moment. As CNN reports, Donald Trump is going behind the counter. I haven't had a chance to mention this today with the Druckenmiller interview and our deep dive with Wendy Benjaminson. But CNN reports Donald Trump will visit a McDonald's Sunday in Pennsylvania and will, quote, work the fry cooker, unquote. I'm guessing he doesn't do the paper hat. Maybe he puts on the apron. But he will be making fries. So we're going to see video potentially this weekend of Donald Trump reaching out the drive-through window with the fries. I don't know. The headset with the mic. A source familiar with the matter telling CNN this comes as Trump has repeatedly claimed Vice President Kamala Harris never actually worked at McDonald's. That's part of her life story, right? Worked the fry cooker at McDonald's. Maybe this will come up on Fox later. I don't know about this whole thing. Donald Trump at McDonald's, we know he loves the fast food. Wonder, maybe, is it possible he sent Big Macs to Vladimir Putin? Because McDonald's is not in Russia anymore, I remind you, after the whole Ukraine invasion. They had to sell the local license there to pull out. So you can't actually get a Big Mac now in Russia. I had to go back and look at this. Producer James was investigating this for us. The Big Mac has become the big hit. That's what they call it. They're not allowed to use the special sauce either. So now McDonald's is like McDowell's or something. The de-arching, as James mentioned. I bring all this up because Donald Trump was asked about Vladimir Putin yesterday. Remember there was a report from Bob Woodward said he sent COVID tests when nobody else could get him here? The questions about their relationship and whether they're still in touch since Donald Trump left the White House. This was part of our interview conducted by Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite. Let's go back to yesterday and the former president. Listen.
Well, I don't comment on that, but I will tell you that if I did, it's a smart thing. If I'm friendly with people, if I have a relationship with people, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, in terms of a country. He's got 2,000 nuclear weapons, and so do we. China has a lot less, but they'll catch us within 5 years.
It's where we start with our panel. Jeanne Zaino is with us, and Rick Davis, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributors. They were with us for the throwdown yesterday in Chicago, and they're back today. Jeanne is, of course, political science professor at Iona University. Rick Davis, his partner at Stone Court Capital. Now that we all want Big Macs, Jeanne, anybody tried that chicken Big Mac? I haven't done that yet. Does Donald Trump need to clean up the remarks about Vladimir Putin and President Xi? Because he made it sound like he's been in touch with the leader of Russia since he left the White House.
He sure did. I mean, it was something of a train wreck. This is the same person who just after Bob Woodward's revelations came out, called Bob Woodward deranged, said he made up the story about the communication with Putin. And then yesterday when asked, he seemed to suggest, as John Micklethwaite said, that that was the truth. And when he was asked about that, he just went on that it would be a good thing. So he absolutely does need to clean it up. And I think more important in this is the COVID part of this story that you referenced, the idea that we had so many people suffering here, and he was sending precious COVID equipment to Putin, his friend, who I guess after he's left office, he is kept in touch with. It is a problem for him, and it is something he should clean up, but I don't think you should hold your breath.
Rick, the line from Donald Trump was, I don't comment on that, as we just heard, but I will tell you that if I did, it's a smart thing. A lot of people took that to assume that he is talking to Vladimir Putin if it would be a smart thing. Is he wrong there?
Well, first, let me say kudos to John Micklethwaite. He did an excellent job in this interview, proven by the massive amount of news that Bloomberg has gotten off of that interview. And so it's very telling. So I've done my sucking up. Now let me get into your warm up. You're definitely on the weave. You know, Donald Trump described these wandering, weird ways of getting to a point and actually never getting to the point. We just saw the Joe Mathieu weave come right through there. I mean, it's amazing. Yep. We start with fries and go to burgers. I mean, you know, and then we wind up with Putin. Look, it's just not consistent, right? I'm not going to say whether or not I talked to Putin, but here's my story about 5 other world leaders I talked to who gave me intimate stories about details of how they're screwing the United States. All the stories about our allies were negative. All the stories about our enemies were positive. I mean, like the symmetry there is just incredible, right? So, yeah, he'll tell you the private details of, you know, his Merkel conversations about, you know, not allowing cars to be exported into Germany, which actually turned out to be not true. But he won't tell you whether or not he's talking to Vladimir Putin. Yeah, I just went on and on. I mean, honestly, it was like dizzying. But when you're caught in the weave, you're caught in the weave. There's not much you can do.
Apparently, it's contagious, Jeanne. The McShrimp is a Russian McDonald's exclusive, I'm reading here for the first time. Goldenly fried on the outside with an interesting preference for Thousand Island dressing as a sauce over the traditional tartar. Now, with that in mind, I ask you, is it smart for Donald Trump to get behind the fry-o-lator at McDonald's this weekend?
Joe Mathieu, are you hungry today? That's what I'm sensing here.
I'm dying in here.
Bring the man some food. You know, I feel like in some ways this has been the McDonald's election. We had to hear about Kamala Harris working at McDonald's. Now we are hearing about Donald Trump visiting McDonald's. I don't know if you and Rick worked at McDonald's. I did not, but apparently this is something that they think is going to appeal to these undecided voters. And I think Elizabeth just said on the IB that Clinton was at a McDonald's. So I don't think that's new for Clinton, but this is where we are today. So I guess we all have to head out to McDonald's now.
Bill Clinton's the one who taught us that it's okay to eat at McDonald's before you go running, Rick. Would you put your candidate behind a big vat of hot oil?
At a McDonald's, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. We've done a lot of sort of behind the counter, flipping pancakes, making eggs, flopping burgers. But rarely have we raised it to the level of the battle of the burger, where, the bona fides of who's stronger on McDonald's is somehow going to sway voters. Look, it's a battle over the middle class. It's a battle over the working class. And I guess McDonald's has just, in this election, become the symbol of what you eat and where you work if you want to connect with the middle class. I think it's all optics. I don't think there's any meat in that burger. But the reality of it is, you're not going to stop Donald Trump from getting in there. It'll be interesting to see how long he stays or what music they'll be playing in the McDonald's when he arrives.
That's a great point. Where's the beef, Jeanne? I'm surprised Rick didn't call it a nothing burger. It does bring us in the middle of a media blitz. Kamala Harris is going to be on Fox News later. Maybe they'll talk about the fryer later. Donald Trump speaking to women in a town hall on Fox earlier today. They can't seem to get enough, although you might have heard Donald Trump skipped out on an interview yesterday morning on the other network. I guess there are exceptions to the rule here. But it seems, Jeanne, they can't do enough of these interviews. And in the case of Kamala Harris, not with a friendly crowd. What does that tell you about the time we're at, beyond the fact that this is a tied race?
First of all, Donald Trump's interviews, a train wreck yesterday on the economy at Bloomberg. Look at how he did the dancing on the night before. And then look at yesterday, speaking to women with Harris Faulkner in Georgia. And he is talking about himself as the father of IVF. So this is where he is in this election cycle. He is desperate to appeal to women on an issue he knows is a huge problem for him. And it is not going well is probably the best way to say it. So I think skipping that interview yesterday may have been a very good thing. But he's going to do more work, because I think when you look at the reproductive issue and healthcare overall, if Donald Trump has challenges in these swing states, it is going to be that issue and that issue alone, which makes his life pretty miserable on November 5th.
Wow, how about that? It's Bret Baier doing the interview on Fox News. What's this experience going to be like for Kamala Harris, Rick? We were framing this yesterday as kind of the two last tent poles. Donald Trump on Bloomberg, Kamala Harris on Fox. Does she make news later, or is she playing defense for an hour?
No, I think she's going to lean in. If she's smart, she's going to have a couple of news items to plunk down and get on the offense. But Bret Baier will drill her down on that. He's a very good interviewer. And remember, I mean, when Bret Baier did his interview of Donald Trump, it was combative. So everyone thought, oh, this is going to be great. Donald Trump, another TV interview on Fox. Bret Baier will be great. Bret Baier ate his lunch. I think you can only assume he's going to try to do the same thing here. He's got his own reputation to brandish, and she's going to have to survive it. Trump did not survive the battle in Chicago with John Micklethwait. The question tonight is, will Kamala Harris survive her battle on Fox with Bret Baier?
What's your expectation, Jeanne? And does she need to make news? She could, in fact, make a new agreement with Fox all over again to do a debate and send it back to Donald Trump. Does she speak to him directly through the camera tonight?
I don't know if she speaks to him, but she has certainly said very clearly she's open to a debate on Fox. I think she should challenge him to that again. We know Fox is already there with her on that. He is scared to debate her. But I think, Kamala Harris, when she has had tough interviews, has done better than expected. So, there is an old adage that the friendlier interviews are sometimes the toughest. So I think that is true. So if I had to guess, I think she will overperform tonight in this interview. And that is a good thing because she needs to appeal to the kind of people who watch Fox News. And she needs to try to pull some of those folks from the moderate middle over to her side in these swing states. So I think this is a win-win for her. Quite frankly, she should have been doing these kinds of interviews since she got into the race 3 months ago.
If we had, Rick, the one more debate, would closing arguments already be underway as it feels now?
Oh, yeah. Closing arguments are underway. We're in the 3-week stretch, halfway through the first week of that. You can see already the campaigns kind of, focusing their attention on certain constituencies. At least we can document that a little better with the Harris campaign. They've got a little more discipline, focused on young people, young blacks. Trying to get them out. Right now, there's a low enthusiasm gap with these voters that the Democrats need to make up their coalition complete. So, we're into closing arguments now.
As we speak with Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, the McShrimp, you can get it as a side as well, James says. You can substitute the fries in any combo for shrimp. That's what they're doing in Russia. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.